Hi everyone. I made a shrunken head! Sorry. There, I said it. Now I can relax. Nope, still super excited. This project was one of those things when you have an idea for a while and you finally get to do it, and you also decide to experiment with some new things, and everything just works. So, yeah, it was a fun week. As you can see from the title, I made a silicone mold of this shrunken head so I can cast it, and I'll show you that in a bit. But the first step was to actually sculpt the head, so I'll have something to make a mold of. I used polymer clay for this just because, I've been working with it for years, so I'm just very comfortable working with it. My original plan was to make a sort of hollow mask. So I used a ball of styrofoam that I cut in half as the base to build on. It was a colored ball, and I thought that the smooth coating will help me later when I remove the finished head. That was a mistake. Not only that the clay stuck to the ball pretty badly, I also had to fight with these silver flakes throughout. But I made it work, and because the polymer clay is not the finished product, I didn't mind too much that it had stains on it. All I cared about is the final texture, how smooth it is. Before I started, I searched online for information and photos of shrunken heads. There are a lot of cartoon shrunken heads or from movies and such, but I decided to go with the real ones as my inspiration. There are a few different cultures that made shrunken heads, so they weren't all made in the same way. But the main point was the removal of the skull. That's how the head could be smaller, and also that's what created some of the more familiar distortions, like having the lower part of the face kind of sticking out and the mouth looking really big. I didn't make a sketch before starting, but I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted. And also, I kept referring to photos to make sure things are going in the direction I want. So, for example, I knew that I wanted to drill holes around the lips in the finished cast, so I could stitch the mouth. So I made sure that the lips stick out enough for that to happen, and also marked where I want the holes to be. You can see me spraying the polymer clay every now and then. That's rubbing alcohol. It's the best way to smooth down the clay. The alcohol softens the clays. It's almost like it melts the top layer. So you can easily smooth down any added clay pieces or lines or scratches that I made by mistake. I added a lot of fine line details with sculpting tool or the cutting knife. In the cast itself, you won't be able to see much of it, but afterwards, when you add paint, it really comes out and it makes a huge difference. When I was happy with the design, I baked the clay according to the manufacturer instructions, and when it cooled down, I sanded it with fine sanding paper. You want this to be as smooth as possible for the making of the mold. And then it was time to make the mold. For this, you want a container that will hold your object with space around it, and preferably something dispensable in case you need to cut through it to free the mold. I padded a plastic container with aluminium foil. It's a trick I learned from Christine McConnell when she showed mold casting in a video a while back. I used hot glue to attach the head to the bottom of the container and also to close any gaps between the head and the bottom, so the liquid silicone will not get in there. Then I started mixing the silicone. I used Smooth On. There's a list of the products I use in my blog if you're interested in the full details. I linked it in the description. I just followed their instructions, and when the mix was ready, gently poured it into the container. I used a brush to get the silicone into all the details, especially in areas like the nose and the mouth where the gaps could create air bubbles. It's another tip that I got from Christine. When I finished pouring, I tapped the container to get the silicone settled into all the crevices and to get the air bubbles out. And then I waited. The silicone takes 6 hours to cure. I started this pretty late, so I ended up leaving it overnight. And in the next morning, I couldn't wait to see how it worked. I almost forgot to film it. I could already see that the silicone caught the details well, but to really see how it went, Of course, I had to cast it, so I did, immediately. I used resin, and full disclosure, what you're seeing is the third trial. It was the first time that I used this brand, and it's faster than what I'm used to, so it took me a while to figure out how fast I needed to get the mixture into the mold. But when I got it right, I was so happy I couldn't stop jumping. It got all the details and it looked amazing. But to really bring it to life, or maybe it's death in this case? Anyways, it was time for paint. I used distress paints, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well the resin took them. Distress paints are very fluid, so sometimes resin resists them and you need gesso or another primer for the paints to catch. But there was no need here, they worked like a charm. I started with a layer of dark brown. Shrunken heads can have lighter shades, almost yellowish, but many have very dark coloring because they're basically mummified. I did make the brown a bit uneven in some areas for some interest. After the brown paint was dry, I added black to the shadow area and to all the fine lines to make them stand out. I used a lot of water with the black paint to create a more natural flow. When this layer was dry, I dry brushed some light colors to create highlights. Because distress paints are very fluid, they're not the easiest for dry brush technique. You need to use a very small amount of paint and basically dry it a bit by running the brush on the worksheet. But it's worth it because it creates very thin layers so you can really build up the effect. At this point, when all the painting was done, I realized that I got so excited about painting the head that I forgot to drill the holes in the lips. So I did it now. And it was fine, I just had to be extra careful so I won't damage the paint and also to cover the white afterwards. When drilling small items like this, I prefer to use a hand drill so I have better control. I have a drill head that can sit in a multi-head screwdriver and it works perfectly for this. I decided to also drill some holes for the hair so it would really look like it's growing out of the head. I used hemp cord for the hair and glued it in the holes with E6000. I figured that with such a small contact point, I should use an extra strong glue. Then I added another line of cords glued to the back of the head with hot glue. To hide this little mess, I cut a piece of black felt and adhered it to the back of the head. This makes sure that the cords will stay put and also gives it a nice finished look. I used pieces of a black feather to add eyelashes to the eyes, because yes, a lot of shrunken heads have eyelashes. It's weird, it's creepy, I had to do it. I set it aside until all the glue dried completely, and then I trimmed the feather lashes down and unraveled the cords for a thicker hair. The hemp cord that I used was designed to have this uneven, distressed look, and the coloring doesn't go fully in. So when it's unraveled, you get bits of gray, which gives the hair so much more interest. Finally, I threaded some twine through the holes I drilled in the lips and added the familiar ties detail. Honestly, I'm a little in love with the shrunken head. I was surprised by how well the details came out in the resin and how well it took the paint. And now that I have the mold, you can be sure that there's more coming. I made the design with this in mind, so there are a lot of details that can be changed, and each head will end up looking different. And I'll definitely have some of them in the shop, so if you're interested, check my website for future shrunken heads. Or you can subscribe to my newsletter, that's where I put all my updates. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll have another one next Friday. Until then, have a great week.